what is the relationship between purpose and success? And I thought I knew. I thought that once you pursued purpose, success didn't matter. Well, it's still a business. We're still human. We still need feedback on, is what I'm doing right? Is it working right? So I kind of have had to redesign my success metrics. And what I would say is that I'm just feeling the weight of the currency of purpose and impact and getting my head around it.
You're listening to another episode of Success with Purpose, where we hold conversations with the most holistically successful people we have the opportunity to connect with. We explore their journeys, their life-changing events, their perspectives, their mindset, and most importantly, their purpose. I'm Harry Goldberg, host, interviewer, and interrogator of this podcast. Father of the most incredible daughter in the world, husband of an incredible woman, and director and empowerment coach at Purpose Advisory. Hope you enjoy this episode, and don't forget to subscribe and like below. Now, let's begin. So Nathan, you're purpose-driven, passion-focused. You've had quite a curious career. So naturally, when you were referred to come onto this podcast by a mutual friend of ours, I became really excited for the conversation. So your career, after a couple of sales and management roles in 2005, you ended up moving to Potentia Recruitment as a consultant, worked your way up over the next 17 years to leadership and now board chair. But what's really fascinating about your career is that since 2017, you've simultaneously been a key investor at 6 startups, board member at 4 companies, co-founder of Humi Group, an independent Kiwi innovation network, and CEO of RIA. And then to top all that off, you're a proud dad, and you've been with, as you put it, the same beautiful woman for 27 years, married for 15. Off the back of all of that, how do you define success?
Well, it's changed a lot over time. I mean, I think to begin with, I was probably like everybody else, proving I was worth something. And we'll perhaps get into some of that later, but that's the thing that really drove me. So I just wanted to prove I was worth something. And that, there's this system of success that, we're all meant to kind of abide and understand. And if we really get our dots lined up, then we can kind of figure out how to play that game well. So, what you've just described is me figuring out how to do that over like a 20-year period of time. And I just I figured it out myself. And, I wish it hadn't taken 20 years, but it probably took 15, to be honest. I think the last 5 years have been quite different, but, it really took 15 years of just trying to just figure this game out. And what are all the parameters? And like, why am I doing it? What matters to me? And I didn't necessarily think about things in this way. I lived into what I'm about to share, but I didn't necessarily have it kind of so elegantly worded. But these are definitely concepts that were super important to me throughout. So I think I have generally defined success as living in that balance point between the need to create sufficient resources to live the life of your choice with happiness, health, and purpose. And the other aspect to me, which is super important, is while realizing your potential. So I think it's possible to, fulfill that definition of success for some people without them necessarily needing to try too hard. For me, it's super important. Success is totally, defined and contributed to by how much you had to stretch yourself, how much you've had to adapt and grow in order to get to where you are.
Okay, so it's not about the needs of your own that you're able to meet or the resources you get, or even just the balancing that with happiness and then realizing potential. It's about how hard you've had to work or how hard you've had to push yourself or how much you've had to grow in order
Yeah.
to experience life the way you want to experience it.
Yeah, I've always had a little bit of a mantra that growth is on the other side of pain. Pretty much everything I've done, that's true. I love exercise. I've adapted and grown well when there's been pain. My greatest achievements professionally have been, there's been some serious pain, like, some ugly moments. I'd rather not have to live them again, but looking back, I would, given what I gained from it, given how much I grew through it, I'd totally do all of those hideous, emotional, stressful times all over again if I had to.
But does that only work when you know that you're going to get benefit on the other side?
Well, that's the test of your faith, isn't it? So, I mean, I guess, piling into something and really giving it everything and crawling, like climbing and crawling your way through adversity would be a really dumb idea if you didn't have a sense of calibration that said that's actually leading somewhere good. Because if you haven't got that calibration, it could be leading to just more pain and complete abject failure. So I think there's a level of calibration that needs to happen for you to go, this is the right kind of pain. If I keep doing this, I will grow and I will enjoy the spoils at some point.
What do you mean by calibration?
I use this word a lot. So, I think it's kind of like a first principles thing. Something happens, we have a response. Is our response to the thing that happened the same thing? Whether it's a color we see and perceive, whether it's a behavior that we exhibit that we then see the effect of in someone else. We need to calibrate so we can try stuff. But we really need to kind of go, is my perception of it what really happened? Because if it is, then I've got a really good sense of what will happen next time. I think fundamentally, so much of life, in my view anyway, is about, trying to create predictable outcomes, trying to understand it well enough, trying to calibrate well enough so that when I do something, the thing that I want to happen or expect to happen will happen. Or avoiding the things that if I do that thing, it's going to be the outcome that I don't want. So it's either, going towards those rewards or avoiding the pain. So the wrong kind of pain.
So this calibration is your ability to align your perception with reality so that when it comes time to take action, that you have a more confident way of being able to predict
Yeah,
where the outcome is going to land.
what the outcome will be. Yeah. And I mean, not doing it alone. I mean, very few of us can live a life defined in the way that we each define success without a whole shitload of other people to kind of contribute to that or to navigate with or around. So, I think it's getting that feedback from others too. And I think, one thing I've learned over time is not to hang my hat too much on that. It's super important to get that feedback. But again, just calibrating which of that feedback you take on board and which of it you filter. So it's just another example of that kind of calibration activity.
All right, so let's dive more into this calibration. It sounds like a really core part of your psyche and what's led you to the success that you've had so far as well. So you've just mentioned that one way to calibrate is by having some people around you to give you some more perspectives.
Mm.
Anyone, everyone, or specific people you choose?
Yeah, look, it depends on the scenario, right? I mean, getting a kind of an almost anonymized group response is useful. I think it's even more valuable when it's people whose opinion and whose perceptions you really respect, where you've got that trust, where you know the quality of the information that you're getting back about the thing that's happened is top notch. It's much easier to work with really good information, to figure out how you tailor or you calibrate what it is you do or how it is you behave.
Yeah, cool. So you just choose different people for different areas which you're working on, or are there some people you just go to for everything?
Yeah,
And
that's a good question. I've got a friend he's like a polymath. So his name's Abhinesh. I wouldn't be surprised if a friend of mine who was on your show, Josh, mentioned him as well. He's an exceptional person. He knows a lot about a lot of things, and so ideal kind of person to have in your stable to kind of give you some feedback. He's also very kind of emotionally and switched on from an EQ perspective, so that really helps. But there are there's groups of people who I look to and who look to me for different things. It's awesome if some of those people are in common, and they tend to play a role in you understanding and calibrating against the world more often. But it really depends on the domain.
so are these relationships you have, or are they mentors or advisors? Who are
Yeah,
these
I've
people?
never. I guess a couple of them could be described as mentors. I've never really sought out. I haven't really ever, which is interesting given what we're talking about. But I've never really sought out a mentor in a structured way. And yet I love being a mentor in a structured way for others.
Right.
And whether there's some kind of shadow there or not, I'm not sure. But it's kind of served me well. I have just kind of continued to look to discover, what it is that I've needed to know without having too many people shortcut that for me in a formal way. But over the last probably 3 or 4 years, especially, there are people that kind of hold a place, and there might be a little bit more formality, but it wouldn't be what I would call kind of a structured, formalized mentor-mentee kind of relationship.
So, can you give me an example? You don't have to give the specifics if it's sensitive, but where you've had a challenge or something's come up and you've realized that you got to calibrate, right? Your perception's not aligned with your reality.
Yeah.
And how have you calibrated?
Or I'm unsure whether your instincts tell you one
Yeah,
thing, but
okay.
you're like, they better be right, because I think what these calibrations boil down to, I call them instincts. Another way to describe them would be heuristics, these kind of rules of thumb, these patterns where you recognize the pattern, you kind of apply that thing. So look, a really good example would be a particular kind of early stage deal that I might be on one or the other side of. Either I'm the investor or I'm attracting investor funds. And there might just be a particular scenario that comes up, and I can get the legal view. So I've got some really amazing legal support, people I really trust who have been with me for a long time. But that's not what I want. I kind of want here's all the options. What would you do here? Because this is a slightly unique scenario. So I know who those people would be. There's about 2 of them. I would get on the phone to them right away, or I'd drop them a note. When I do that, they know that it's one of those moments, and it's often reciprocated, where I need some information. I need a small amount of deep expertise really fast. I think that's the key, isn't it? Small amount doesn't need to be a lot, but it's got to be deep expertise. I just need an answer. I need to calibrate for me. They realize the urgency. They drop everything. They give me that calibration. I learn something from it, and now it's formed, almost the draft of my that instinct or that heuristic that I could use in the future. Once I apply it and see the outcome and see the response and see whether, we really achieve what we wanted to, that's another bit of calibration. The advice, you apply it, you see what happens, you like the outcome, the calibration feeds back, and, that pattern deepens in your decision-making process in the future.
So as that pattern deepens, then those relationships with those people deepen as well?
It's a good question. Yeah, the respect, yeah, they do. They really do. And, there may not be that many of those exchanges. There might be, a dozen, I think would be quite a lot. But those are a dozen moments where I really needed somebody, where I didn't have the expertise that I needed. I borrowed from their life experience. I mean, that's an incredible gift. That's not just some kind of throwaway, oh, here's a bit of advice. They've really shortcut the risk, the pain, the potential failure for me by sharing that thing that may have taken them years to develop. I love that. I really respect that. And when it happens to me and others kind of come to me, I guess I also have a bit of an expectation that they'll treat what has happened, that exchange, and the value that it provides in the same way. There's something a little bit sacred about it. You've got to really mark the time as there's a special moment where somebody really gave something significant of themselves. They didn't just give advice.
Yeah. Okay, so where's the difference between that giving advice versus giving something really significant of themselves?
I wonder if it's maybe it's the intent with which it's given. Maybe it's there's an answer. Some things are black and white. Some things are just a fact. There's a question, there's a fact, you get an answer. Thanks. I now have that fact. Thank you. When it's the culmination of years of experience, some pain, them taking risk, them diving deep into many versions of the same kind of document to see the differences between them and to figure out whether, what the right path around a particular clause of a contract or something is, they're really bottling up for you a significant part of their experience. So I think you can just tell, it's not like, oh, here's the fact, the answer's 3. It's here's the context. These are the things you need to think about. When I apply my value system to those, this is the way I would make that decision. Here's the way that you could use it. That's that's often how it will play out. It isn't just an answer. It's not binary.
Because that's interesting. Because now when I reflect on what you shared about growth is on the other side of pain, it doesn't necessarily have to be your pain that the growth is on the other side of, right? You can have growth off the back of someone else's pain.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. And so, hey, look, if the alternative was me going through that pain and me getting into a partnership that failed and having to, deal with the consequences of doing that, but I don't because they've done that. Wow. That's why, I treat it with the respect that it deserves.
Right. And so that's interesting, right? Because a lot of people, when they're looking at their future journey, and they've got this mantra of, like, no pain, no gain. I've got to have this. I've got to be able to go through these tough times and hustle and grind in order to get the best outcome.
Yeah.
Uh, they often don't realize that pain isn't a prerequisite. You don't have to have pain.
Mm.
It sounds like the way that you're describing it is that pain, whenever you have it, will lead to growth, but it doesn't mean
Yeah.
that you seek it out.
Prepared for pain.
Prepared for pain.
If that's the best solution, some things you just have to live. You've got to live it in your skin. It's got to be in your skin. Even the best person, you trust them. It's like, great, thank you for preparing me. I've still got to kind of walk. I've got to walk through that valley myself. So I think it just depends on the nature of the thing. But yeah, I mean, fundamentally, you're right. It doesn't have to be your pain, but you've got to be prepared to. What I wouldn't say respect, or I wouldn't capture in my definition of success, is where you can achieve the same things by doing it entirely through other people's pain. That doesn't really kind of align with my value system.
So why not, right? Because you've had a whole lot of pain yourself, and you're there supporting them when they're going
Mm,
through challenging times, and you can help them avoid pain.
mm,
Like, isn't that just mutually beneficial? Where if you could go through something and not have any pain at all, but you're growing off the back of all these other people's pain,
yeah,
and they're only sharing that with you because you're sharing with them from past pain that you've experienced.
yeah, yeah. Look, I would say I would agree with you to the extent that it's possible.
Right.
Um, but I think, it isn't always possible to
No.
kind of hack life to quite that extent. I also think that I think there's a bit for me around if you always seek that short, smart path, it's someone else's, pain expense. How might that not serve you in that moment when you really do need to tread that path yourself? Or will you simply keep looking for someone to shorten the path and lighten your load? Because I just don't, that's just not how it works. And I think, how would you decide if you were that person? How would you decide this is one of those moments I'm going to walk this myself, or I'm just going to keep looking until I can find some schmuck who will share their life experience, even though I may not yet deserve it because I don't really know them that well.
Yeah. So how do you decide?
Well, I haven't needed to
Right.
because I've put myself through that pain first. So if I kind of look at, and I kind of alluded to it before, I certainly took the kind of the harder path to get to where I am. I probably could have shortcutted things by applying these kinds of approaches or principles around things. I wouldn't do it any other way. But again, that's my kind of, I feel like it's interesting. I feel like I deserve what I have as a consequence of treading that path and going through all of that pain and adversity. I've earned the right to, what it is that I've achieved. And
Okay.
so would I feel that way if I'd been able to kind of achieve the same thing largely vicariously through other people's learnings? I don't know. I mean, I guess it's just a different set of parameters around. It's the same game. It's a slightly different strategy as to how it is that you realize your role or maximize your role in that game. So I think there would be a way to respect it and keep your values intact.
Yeah, okay.
Mm,
So how does this apply to the way that you act now in
mm.
all the deals and the investing and everything which you're working on, uh, versus how you would have acted 5 years ago? Are you more likely to lean on the advice and the experiences and the learnings from the pain of others?
I think there's a few parts to that answer. Um, Number one, the short answer is yeah. I think I would. I'm more likely to. I've got a better network. I've got more credits in that network because I've reciprocated with a number of
Yeah.
people a number of times. Yeah, I think I would probably, I'm better at filtering the things I don't need to do. I have this kind of view where, and I've had a bunch of conversations in recent months where we talked about these patterns, these kind of heuristics, the instincts, whatever you want to call them. In my world, those are facts, and you have your own version of those. Those are facts. They're patterns that you apply, and then you get this really solid outcome most of the time. So that stuff's really solid. Um, I think one of the risks is as we get older and we develop more of these things, we can fall into the trap of kind of going, we kind of taper off in terms of you know, our desire to either tune those facts, those patterns, or to acquire more of them. And we're less likely to believe that there's a better one out there. So I think the kind of second part to my answer is, I think it's really important that we believe we continue to need to adapt and grow, and that we don't know it all, even if some of our patterns and our approaches really, really work well. They've worked well in the past, they may work well in the future, but we're in a very dynamic environment. So being, I think it's challenging because it's not necessarily about ego, but it is about ego. Part of it is just, the experiment of life, but part of it is our ego tells us that actually you know this stuff, so don't go ask someone else for it, you already know the answer. And I think that's a really limiting, if we believe that, I think that's really limiting. So I really, I'm very active in that space. I've been in it for the last 6 months, kind of going, I know all this stuff. I need to continue to look at other ways of doing things and other people's experiences with similar subject matter, or maybe they've got that experience and I don't. I need to figure out and challenge my own beliefs and what the right kind of solution or approach to something is. I've still got confidence in those things, but I've got an open-mindedness to kind of almost doing a bit of a compare mine with theirs. What's the difference? What are some of the angles that they're looking at that I'm not looking at? Could I adopt some of that? Do I toast mine and adopt all of theirs? And I think, I really fundamentally believe that we are meant to be, to keep us young, to keep us sharp. We need to continue to adapt. It's every part of us, a cellular level, our physicality, our minds, cerebrally, socially. We need to continue to adapt, then we're never really dying.
Cool. There's so much that you shared there to unpack. But the main question I have from there is, how do you keep that ego in check?
So I've got a kind of I have a funny relationship with ego, but I know what my relationship is with it. And I wonder, I meet people and I can see they've got a relationship with it. I don't know how kind of much they understand their relationship with their ego. I've been kind of chasing my ego away for years. I've been seeking the kind of either the pause, the suspension, or the death of the ego. For me personally, I don't think it serves me super well. But if I hadn't had enough ego, I don't believe I would have achieved what I have. Now, I honestly don't believe that ego plays much of a role in my life. Hasn't done for about the last 12 to 15 months. It's not about me, and I'm solid enough in myself. I'd rather do things that where my ego didn't really play a role. It wasn't really factored.
What changed?
You're familiar with, this concept of the shadow?
From a Jungian perspective?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've got a shadow, right? And I
Yeah.
think the question is how much do we understand our shadow? We probably all have a shadow, but how much do we understand it, and what is our relationship with that shadow? The sooner we can understand what that shadow is, the sooner we can manage it, and we can kind of recognize when that part of ourself is playing out, and we can adapt accordingly, and those around us can as well. I was aware I had a shadow. I'm kind of in an interesting, and kind of a privileged place. I have a mum, so I have an amazing relationship with my mum, Gail. Amazing woman. Most of my values, those foundational ones, have come from her. I have dad I haven't spoken to in more than 25 years. I don't know where he is. So she's been the greatest contributor to fundamentally this foundational sense of who I am. She's a psychotherapist. I've kind of inherited, or it was in, kai ho waiu, as we say in Māori, the gift of the mother's milk. It was one of the two or both. And I've had this ability to understand people reasonably well. And, so probably had a greater understanding of myself than most would have if they didn't have a Gail in their lives. There's its limitations though. when you kind of, if you like, your psychotherapist is your mum.
I was going to say that would have made an
And, you,
interesting teenagehood.
and if you might have dad issues, which so many people do, and I thought maybe I do, it would make sense. She's probably not the person to be able to help me, understand those issues. So, understanding there was this shadow, a void, whatever you want to call it. I kind of figured that out in about October, November of 2020. And so I'd never been to a therapist or a psychologist other than my mum. And that, was in kind of casual conversation. So I was like, I was in a good place too. I was in a really good place. And it was almost seemed like the best time to go and kind of dig into the shadow. So I like booked in asked a couple of friends um, for some advice around, this is probably an example of what we talked about before. Had they walked a journey with a psychologist? Had they been through some pain? And did they have a great outcome? I had a couple of suggestions. And the one that I got was awesome, amazing. So I went and saw this guy for, I think, about 2 or 3 sessions. And, within the first 10 minutes, I did a little bit of prep. I was like, oh, yeah, how do I describe myself and what might the shadow be? And I just shared this stuff, right? And I think, I could see his face. I could see that it was probably uncommon for someone to have it kind of as packaged up as I do. And I got to thank my mum for that. But I did very quickly find myself with just a little bit of prodding and a couple of questions from him, just saying some things. I'm like, whoa, man, okay, these are things I maybe suspected were there, but I wasn't really aware of. And so these kind of insights, the shadow, if you like, just kind of poured out of me. And I know you're like, do I ask the question of what was it or not? Is that appropriate? But I'll share it with you. Fundamentally, I was saying things like, I never felt like I belonged anywhere. I've never felt like I'm good enough. I'm part Maori, part Pākehā. So as I shared, I think earlier, father Maori, both of his parents Maori, Indigenous people of this country of New Zealand. My mum, Pākehā, meaning Scottish, Irish, British, Norwegian. And so, there was some stuff in there. I felt like I was never quite white enough, never quite brown enough, too brown. So these are the types of things I found myself saying. I'm like, whew, it's powerful. And then, it kind of clicked. I've kind of lived a life of, feeling like inferior, having somewhat of an inferiority complex of being an imposter, and never really owned that. And kind of in those moments, everything made sense. I'm like, man, that's what's driven me, is to be everything I could be, to be worthy. I think I even mentioned it in my definition of success, to feel worthy. I spent like 43 years not feeling worthy, even though I'd proven it to everyone else who was, looking or not, that I am. I still hadn't proven it to myself. And once those kind of pieces dropped, it just all clicked into place. And I was able to kind of let go of that shadow. I understood the shadow really well. I was told by the psychologist, he's like, look, you get it now, and I can see how much it's changed your view, but you will relapse because that's been your default behavior for such a long time. And he was right. And so, I think we all relapse. So we learn something new, or we develop a new pattern, we relapse. We kind of go back to the old pattern. And a little bit like meditation, all you really need to do is just see it happening. You just kind of acknowledge that it's there. And that for me is all it's taken to kind of break the relapse cycle, the relapse pattern. But yeah, super powerful to have that insight about your shadow. And, I've been fortunate enough to be able to use that in a very powerful way, in a kind of a powerful way that I never expected to be able to, in a way that I live my life and in terms of the choices that I make with what I want to do with the rest of my life.
So what, and thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, what comes up? I mean, what are the changes in the way that you live your life, and changes in the decision as a result of finally identifying that your sense of worth needs to come from within rather than from without? What
Yeah.
changed?
Yeah.
What's
Well
changed in your actions?
I'll tell you what changed in my sense of self, just a real lightness, a sense of liberation. Yeah, and a real sense of it's not about me. Once you kind of get yourself out of the way, what's possible? And I really, that's one thing I'd love to spend so much of, well, the rest of my life doing, is helping people get that, understand their shadow, give them some skills to be able to do that, but also then lean into, the life outcome that they really deserve. So what's kind of come of that is a desire if I think about my situation, I'm on a spectrum. If you think about what I described in terms of this inferiority complex and like where that's come from, in this case, it's a sense of the labels attached to being Maori, to being Indigenous, that have formed in this country since colonization. And rather than a big diatribe about colonization, that's the way that the labels were created for me in this environment in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Those labels exist for people everywhere. They can be ethnic, they can be gender based, they can be just a consequence of the decisions we make. So, these are people that are disenfranchised in some way. And sometimes it can be really subtly, but it can be super powerfully. So I think my belief is that to some extent, most of us are on this kind of spectrum where, we kind of, it's the shadow and the sense of self-worth and the sense of, are we good enough? And the reasons why those labels have come about, they can be different, but they also shared with a lot of others. So the penny that dropped for me almost immediately was, what am I going to do with that? Like, how many others out there are like me? Knowing that it's got to be super common. And when I think about, what I've been blessed enough to be able to realize, in my life up to that point, or in my life, the kind of the thought that came to me was, what would it take for people to ditch their labels? So what would it take for them to kind of almost cast the shadow out, if that shadow has come about as a consequence of, falling on the spectrum like I have? And because wouldn't that be powerful if you could, let's say, I guess put words around it. I was both proud to be Maori, but also ashamed because of the labels that were attached to being Maori in this country. So what if we could ditch the labels? What would it take to ditch the labels? And what I know, I've been in this space for a long time, is skills. That's the currency, right? The currency of this world. Like, we talk about wealth, but to create wealth, most people, to create wealth, they need a specific set of skills that give them a level of fitness in the environment in which they're in. And that fitness should put them in the upper quartile or better. If they've got those, they really can live a much more self-determined life. They've got choices. So, the thought that came to me, I'm like, right, how do we take what I've learned over like let's just call it an elongated period of time, those life lessons, to figure out how to just call it mastering the system. I'm not saying I've mastered the system, but I've delivered it to a level of mastery, which I am keen to talk about, which is enough to be liberated from the machine, where I don't have to work, where everything I can do can be based upon the choices, the things that matter most to me. If we could like compact that down, and if we could deliver it to people, give access to people who are experiencing this kind of state, these labels, might they be able to overcome those and realize the life outcomes that they really deserve as a consequence of this infusion of skills? And from skills, we get great outcomes. From outcomes, we get great choices. So, that was the kind of the genesis of the idea for the business, which you mentioned, REA, REA, that I've been at for, the last kind of 7 or 8 months in earnest.
Okay, so you're now helping people. I'm not sure if it's directly or indirectly. I'll get you to share about that. But you're helping people kind of identify the shadow within themselves, identify the labels that society has given them, and then to also identify how those labels are holding them back in ways that they're not yet conscious of.
Yeah.
Or they're kind of conscious of, they're kind of aware of it, but they're definitely not conscious enough yet to be able to identify that that's not the way they want to live.
Yeah.
So how are you doing that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a portion of our program. So I guess we have these programs, they're accelerated pathways. The idea is never worry about a paycheck or a job again for employers. So it's an employer ecosystem as well. Never worry about finding talent again. It's a space, 17 years in that, the tech kind of recruitment resourcing space, a space I get well. Tech industry is full of amazing opportunities. Probably 90 to 95% of the people that our business Potentia has met over the last 17 years have not been right for these amazing jobs in tech. They've been missing something. One aspect of their skills are not just the hard skills, it could be the soft skills, it could be the way they relate. could be the self-awareness. There's so many things that, you kind of need to have in order to be, hireable into the tech sector. So, and it's a beautiful industry that is growing exponentially with incredible opportunities, and it pays way above, most other domains. What I also know is you can get into that industry without having to, do 3+ years at university. So our promise to learners is, get into the tech sector, paying you 60K plus as your first role in that industry within 6 months. We effectively break those 6 months into two. We have an academy phase where we start to, work on some of that stuff around identifying their shadow, identifying strengths, and then we kind of help infuse in them the core skills or the soft skills, the business skills, the stuff you need to know in the world today, to really figure things out. But also things like, financial literacy, how to create wealth. So there's a kind of a set of not just education or work skills, there's a set of life skills that we're infusing into our programs so that people are really set up to be productive, not just in work after 6 months, but also in life.
That's
Um,
amazing. It's like university that people really, it's what universities are missing, or
yeah,
schools
look, it
especially.
really is. It really is. I mean, if you look at most traditional programs, who takes all the risk? It's not the university. They get paid very well. In this country, they get paid 20 grand per year between the subsidies from government and what it is that the student pays over the 3-year period for an undergraduate degree. You're looking at kind of 60K. But then at the end of it, there's no guaranteed job. I mean, we find, people with degrees all the time who are like, I'll do anything. I just need a job. That's crazy. I mean, what kind of a system is that there where this person takes all of this risk, invests all of this time, and then the actual value of that is relatively low in the market. They don't actually have any skills that you could put to work right away. What they've got is a proven ability that now teach me some skills. I mean, that's nuts. So when you really kind of distill down the bits you need, and we talk about it kind of being productive from day one, it's not 3 years long. And we think,
Mm.
it's 6 months or less, depending on your starting point, kind of entering one of our programs.
Yeah, that's amazing. There's something which I want to ask you about that as well, because you mentioned earlier on that you doubt that you would have had the success or gotten to where you are had you not had the ego throughout the majority of your career. And here you're helping people just at the start of their career, just as they're doing university and getting all these skills to effectively reduce a whole lot of that ego, for lack of a better word. And so do you feel like if you had this kind of experience 20 years ago that you would have been less successful and achieved less?
It's a really good question. I've pondered this a lot over the last year. Um, I always talk about it in terms of kind of, I wouldn't do it any other way, but if we pick that apart, would I have been ready? Would I have preferred to do it? If somebody had kind of said, hey, Nate, you don't have to spend however many years just, carving your own path, reinventing the wheel. Here's like 30, 40, 50% of it compacted into this program here. And you're going to be really set up. I think the questions I've got is how ready would I have been then?
Mhm.
But mainly, it would have just helped me so much. I didn't even know the things that I needed to learn, let alone how to learn them. I just had to figure it out. Like, some of them I lucked into. I saw other people succeed. Um, yeah, but if even if I knew, or let alone, had short pathways to kind of get these skills, it would have made a massive difference. Massive. I think it would have shortcut my pathway to kind of, let's just call it, success. I don't know that it would have shortcut my path to purpose. Yeah, that's the bit I'm kind of pretty sure it just needed to be the way that it's been. I don't think I was ready any sooner than I am now to be able to do what I'm doing.
Mm. It kind of sounds like you're quite comfortable with that as well. Like quite comfortable knowing that your journey's been not just as it's been, but it's been what it's meant to be.
Yeah, and like I think, that is kind of what I said before, right? I've walked the kind of the painful path to get there. I wouldn't, and I'm glad that I have, and I feel like I deserve it. If I'd been able to shortcut it, I'm not sure that I would have. You know, I have said things in the last few months, like when I think about what it is we're trying to do, we're trying to positively impact as much of the world as possible who experience this. and create intergenerational impact. Because when you have those skills, it can just take one person. There's some really good data that shows one person is all it takes in someone's life to set them on a path of prosperity. That if they don't have that person, the numbers show it isn't going to happen. Some data that I heard for Maori in New Zealand are, the key determinant of future success is that you have one person in your whānau, your family, who works every day. Now, I don't mean works like a particular paying job, just works every day. Actually does 5 days work a week, regular paying job, which sounds really obvious. It sounds like a really low bar. But as it turns out, 30% of families, Maori families in New Zealand, do not have that single person, which blows my mind. And it motivates the hell out of me because, another way to describe what we're doing is we're going to be that one person to as many people as possible at scale. And we know that that'll create a branch of prosperity for them, for their family, friends, their kids. That's what it takes. So we're sowing seeds for future generations. In Māori, we call it kaitiakitanga. It's the practice of stewardship, of thinking of the well-being of a community as a whole, but not just in this generation, but all successive generations. So I can't think of a more powerful thing to put my modi, my energy, my resources, my relationships, everything I have into. And I feel super grateful that's happened. And I don't know, if not for that kind of awakening moment, kind of learning about my shadow, I don't know if or when it would have happened. I don't believe it would have, because I was never geared towards impact in the way that I am now. It was always a part of what I did, but it was a part of what I did. It wasn't what I did.
It was like a value add that you had for existing services you were selling, right?
Hey, look, it was probably a value. It was one of my values, but where was it in the stack? It was a little bit further down. And I don't mind saying that. I mean, I've got a good value system, but when I would hear people talking about equality and stuff, 2 years ago, I was like interested, but I didn't feel it. It wasn't something that I really felt that I needed to really get behind. Not to say that I don't love helping people and that I haven't previously, done my bit to try and help others, but not like this. Yeah, so I literally a switch was flicked.
How's this changed your parenting style?
I'm a very, very conscious, intentional dad. Um, partly because, and I've got a few friends who've kind of walked a similar journey to me. When you know what a great dad isn't, because that's what you've experienced firsthand, you basically just take the opposite of that, and you've got a pretty good list of the kind of dad you want to be. It's actually highly effective. And
Right.
then when you've got a great mum, it kind of, there's someone who can fill in the gaps. But I've been very intentional about, how is it that people learn, adapt? How do they experience fear? How do they use their fear? Do they run away from it? I've walked that journey. I still do, like all of us. But when I do, I really try and learn from it. And when I learn from it, I really look at how can I teach others what it is that I've learned. So my kids have always had that from me. Really good example is, public speaking, one of those horrible things that most people hate. I was, as kind of, fate would have it, I was always pushed into doing that from a really young age. And I remember kind of hating it, but you just kind of got better at it. You got good at it. And consequently, it's part of my toolkit. And so whenever there's a moment where people gather and we need to mark time with some words, someone should do it. Why not me? And so I've brought them up that way. And recently they both were freaked out about their speech competitions at school, like physical fear and sickness, I think we've all experienced a bit of that at some point in our lives. And we went through a process of understanding the value of it, the power of speaking, and then the process of creating a speech, and then being able to kind of learn how to perform it. And I was so proud of them. They both delivered it. They did an incredible job. And they both made their speech finals, and my daughter went on to like into school finals and stuff. This is a kid that was too freaked out to do a speech at all, let alone be the person to differentiate ourselves. And that's the kind of intent, I think, that if we can all look, if we can afford the time, and I think we should all try and afford that time, that's what shapes our kids. That's the formational, foundational stuff. And I've always been like that. What's changed, to kind of specifically answer your question? They've seen a bit of a shift in me. They've seen me share my story, it's a version of what we've been talking about many times with different people here at our house over the last year or so. And every time they'll be with their friends, they'll be doing something, there'll be a lot of noise around or what have you, and I'll catch them, they'll be stopped, just very quiet, very attentive, very, very keyed into what it is that I'm talking about, and they're thinking. And I can see, they know what's most important to me and to this family. That stuff gets in, that's a value system that I think they already have. They're already talking about things like, my son wants to be in the NBA. He's a great basketball player, but he wants to be in the NBA. We've talked about backup plans because, not that many people are going to make it into the NBA, right? So, about 6 months ago, I was driving along in the car and we were driving somewhere and he was looking kind of thoughtful and he looks at me in the rearview mirror and he's like, Dad, if I don't get in the NBA, can I come and work for the, and one day do you think I might be able to run that company? And I was blown away because on the one hand, he's got this dream of being a professional basketball player. And on the other, he's really considering what might his kind of contribution to the world be. And how can he align it? How can he hitch into our family wagon? I was blown away. And my sister said, and my daughter has said similar things. So I think what it means is we do have far more considered conversations, quite specific conversations about other people and about the state they might be in and what it is that we've got in our power to be able to do to help them. Look, if you start hearing those things at the age of 8 or 9 or 10, where does that lead you over the next 30, 40 years? When you realize that those are the things that your parents tell you are the most important things in life. I've got a pretty good guess as to where it leads you, but time will tell.
Yeah, I mean, even just at the beginning of what you were sharing there was someone else I had on this show in an earlier episode who was he had a really insecure upbringing, and he gave the example of two brothers who who both had the same dad, and the dad was an alcoholic, and when they interviewed the one who became an alcoholic himself and is an addict and has got issues and has never made anything of himself, said, "Why are you like this way?" "Oh, because my dad was an alcoholic. Of course I'm like that." And they asked the other one who's been really successful and achieved a hell of a lot and has a loving family and beautiful connections in his life. "And why are you like that?" It's like, "Well, because my dad was an alcoholic. Obviously, I'm not going to end up like that." And
It's amazing, isn't it?
it is, and it's exactly what you're sharing, right? It's you shared about this earlier as well. You've got to align your perception with your reality, like this calibration that you're
Yeah.
referring to.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you've aligned them in a much more effective way, especially in the last, what do you say, the 15 to 18 months.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really fair. A lot of it has made sense. There's a kind of I think even my definition of success, I think you've probably read, and no doubt people listening have read Yuval Noah, um, Species. There's a really good part in that book where it really stood out for me. Of all the cool stuff I learned about humanity in that book, the part that stood out the most was this: we used to kind of wander the earth. I don't know what kind of existence it would have been, but there would have been a little bit of a sense of liberation. But then we would have spent most of our time just looking for food. What I wonder is, what did we do in the rest of our time? When it wasn't filled with stuff, what did we do? And then, the part that really stood out was the agricultural revolution and all the revolutions since, which have fundamentally concentrated our proximity to towns, cities, and meant that we need to kind of play a part in a system. And that system of success is, what we have today. It's a version of it. We've got to kind of play our role in something inside that system. We get some shekels for it. Then we're stuck doing what it is we need to do to get those shekels. Surely that's not the life we're meant to be living. It certainly wasn't in a number of thousands of years or millions of years have gone by. But it seems pretty sad because I've met a lot of people in the last 17 years in the recruitment space, and they're enjoying varying degrees of fulfillment. Not that many people are truly passionate doing stuff they really, really want to be doing. We're all just kind of feeding the machine, and we kind of get shackled to it. And my definition of success was like basically freeing myself from that machine. Like I want to get to a point where I don't have to feed it, where I can just kind of, snip the shackles and do something else or do nothing. Um, and then, there's that really interesting question, like what happens when you are free of it? Like when you don't have the same pressures, what happens? Um, do we find our purpose? Do we do some stuff that we wouldn't have otherwise done? I mean, actually, some of the people I respect most are people who are doing that, but they haven't necessarily kind of create that liberation from the machine. Their purpose is both feeding the machine, being part of the system, but also realizing their purpose. I really respect that. Um, I feel like I've taken a longer path to get there, but it's meant that I now have choices. It's kind of my terms. And I really like that. I wonder, did I need to do it this way? Or could I have, what did I need the switch to be flicked in order to kind of go, I'm here to help. My purpose in life is to do this. Did I have to be freed from the machine? Is it that Matrix moment, where I realized it was a battery? Is that what happened? I don't know the answer to it. I kind of like the fact that it's a question. I don't know what the answer is. It's almost a little bit irrelevant, but well, it's a little bit irrelevant for me, but it's certainly relevant for my kids. And I think it's really relevant for the people who we're trying to, help create the life outcomes and paths that they really deserve and that are possible. Because the question would be inside of that, what role does their purpose play in the choices that they make? And is there a role that we play in our business, this education path to work business, where some of our pathways are just for purpose, whilst figuring out a way to have enough of the financial resources that you need in order to, you know, achieve that sense of life choice. I don't know. I haven't thought a huge amount about it. I like the idea of it, but we're at the beginning of this journey in this business. It's a long way to go. Maybe it's possible.
Well, I'm curious how you define purpose then, because that sounds like it has a distinct difference from success and from intention.
Yeah, I think they get really blurred. I think it's a little bit of choices. When you're in the frame of reference of I've got a family, um, purpose looks like it's kind of really tied to financial success and being able to provide, give them choices, provide them pretty much everything that you've ever wanted to be able to provide your family. And those measures are typically pretty financially centric.
Yes.
Um, I mean, obviously the values and stuff, I shared a lot about that, about, my relationship with my kids and the style of parenting. Um, but yeah, I think my definition of purpose, what it was up until a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, was, doing something that considered everybody and that people can be passionate about, that allows us to align. So it's got a doing good factor in that values stack. There's one or more of those values that are really important to us that are also being realized through this definition of purpose and our pursuit of trying to realize it or fulfill it. So inside of our Potentia business, about 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, we really cottoned on to this idea of what does an amazing culture really look like? What are the components of that? What are the needs of people? And holistically, what are people's needs? They're not workers. They're not just mums and dads or brothers and sisters or parents. They're like all of those things. So let's consider all of those needs and let's kind of figure out a way to create that so that they get this really clear sense of, this the kind of the well of wisdom and power and inspiration that they should get from work, contribute to it, and also draw from. And I think in a work context, in a business context, there's a way to align that so that people go, there's kind of a higher level of alignment and achievement. There's a higher calling aside from just the work that I do day to day. I do believe we all need a bit of that. or if we don't, maybe needing it. I think we need it. But I think for people that don't feel like they need it, there's value for them, even if they don't feel it, in practicing it. There's massive value in it. And once you practice it a little bit, you realize that it's super powerful, and that it creates a lot of liberation even inside that same work context. And it binds people together. Like you've got a reason for doing things, and those measures are different. Just kind of the measures expand. They're not just a single measure of money or wealth or whatever the kind of the KPI might be. There's this other thing, and it makes us feel good about it. And it makes us feel like we're doing more than just feeding the machine. For me, and so that is alive and well and breathing, and I witness it inside of Potentia, and I'm proud that we have all played our role in contributing to that, and that actually it's got nothing to do with me anymore. I'm actually not even someone that fosters that now. I can just see it, thriving, which is cool. When you when it's in the context of, so change the parameters, move the context away from, say, an existing business, when it's like a pursuit that you can start up from scratch, there are no parameters. You're not trying to retrofit something. You can start again. You can create whatever you like, and doing it from the ground up is incredibly powerful. What I've seen, all of those amazing things that I learned, the calibration that I got from doing it in Potentia, we brought a lot of that with us into there. What we've added is this pure sense of purpose. The actual work itself is measurable impact for others. It's not a byproduct of the work we're doing. It's an incredible magnet for people. It's an amazing filter too, to be fair. But it's a magnet and a filter at the same time. Not everyone's into that, but those that are, whoa, it's a super powerful thing. I feel privileged to be part of that, to see the incredible people that have been drawn. It's kind of a movement that we're part of. We're one of a number of groups of people or businesses that are part of a movement around change. And when they see how authentic and pure from top to bottom it is, they'll bring all of themselves to it, not just the part that they think is right just for work, and that regular kind of box that you kind of put parts of yourself into for work. And it's incredible. It's so potent. And I'm only just learning about that because it's only been, it's a couple of co-founders and I. It was us, and we were all aligned, and that was powerful. And now we've got people who we didn't know at all, who are also powerfully connected. And so it's kind of this experiment. Like, I'm kind of seeing how amazing it is. They're contributing to it. It's actually more about the movement, more about the purpose, and less about me. And that's taken a bit of getting used to, because the construct that I was accustomed to, that pattern that worked, was the business needs a leader. That defines a lot of the stuff. And then, as people, we naturally do look to a single person. I've definitely witnessed that is a way that most people find comfort. This is a bit different, and you've kind of got more individuals who are leaders, if that makes sense. And it's not really dependent upon anyone. It's really different. So I'm kind of learning as I go on that. It's a cool journey. I love it. But it is funny being in a space that's kind of new, when you've developed some patterns that work and you think you've got it sussed, and you apply them and you're like, they do work, but I don't know if they're the best ways for this to work now. I had this conversation with this new team, and I shared this with them prior to Christmas. I'm like, this is new to me. Like, this mode of working, the why we're doing it and stuff. This is different. This is, our whatever successes are the byproduct of us creating impact in other people's lives. Any financial success that any of us realize and enjoy is a byproduct of doing the main things right. It takes some getting used to. It just takes a bit of recalibrating. Not in a bad way, but it's still growth. It's still understanding how to utilize that and figure out what its properties are, if you like, that you can then collectively work with to achieve the best things that are possible.
I'm excited to ask you more questions about leadership, but just quickly before we go there, where you were talking about purpose, and you're talking about what it sounds like, just so I can get clear on it. It sounds like you started off with purpose being in these like really kind of narrow parameters of family, I've got to make sure there's enough wealth, and that there's enough wealth that I can spend time with family, but also give them what they need.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. That's my parameter of my purpose.
Yeah.
And then you've gradually started widening those parameters.
Mm.
And you started gradually just increasing the bubble of what falls within you actually being purposeful, or what your
Yeah.
purpose is.
Yeah. That's accurate. I'd add to it though, that was the primary purpose. Secondary purpose for me was helping people realize their potential. I've always been super excited about that. I love that. Yeah, I still do. It's the thing I'm most passionate about. But yeah, it was family first. But once you get there, what happens? Once you kind of go, well, we've kind of created that thing. So now what? It's funny because it's, you know, those. So and you've got a question around parameters, and I'll get back to that. But I think I was describing this to my team in this conversation that I'm referring to. Um, I understand the currency of money, and relationships. Those are the things that I understand. And so when I figure out how successful I am over time, I've gone, what resources do we have, and what relationships have I built, and how much value do I feel has been stored up in that and given mutually. I'm learning the currency of purpose, and it didn't land super well to start with because I don't have a feel for that currency. You get a whole pile of money in Thai baht. You get this pocket full of cash. Woohoo! You're so much you can't stuff into your pocket. And then you go out and buy something and you're like, man, I need a lot of those bahts. And the same in Bali, you're like, wow, this is crazy. And so you start to develop a bit of a feeling for the currency. I've been doing the same thing with purpose. And it's been a lesson I didn't expect to need to learn. Like, my sense of success, because purpose, what is the relationship between purpose and success? And I thought I knew. I thought that once you pursued purpose, success didn't matter. Well, it's still a business. We're still human. We still need feedback on, is what I'm doing right? Is it working right? So I kind of have had to redesign my success metrics. And what I would say is that I'm just feeling the weight of the currency of purpose and impact, and getting my head around it, because we've been creating this vision and it's landed super well. And so the currency there was the feedback of, that's an amazing vision, and we believe you, we believe in it, and we're going to support it. Great. Affirmation, feedback, calibration. At some point, that's not the vision is not to tell a story and have people buy into the story. The vision is to see people actually realizing the outcomes that the vision talks about.
Right.
And because we've got our first cohort launching a week today, we haven't yet done that. We haven't actually yet had people come through. The future currency is that. It's the currency of life change, where people can identify how they've grown and what it's meant in their lives. That's the currency that I look forward to being able to understand and appreciate. But I got stuck in limbo there for a couple of months where I'm like, it's all idea and vision and affirmation. And it's not about money. And I'm accustomed to that. And the relationship's great. I get that, but what's this other piece? And so, my appreciation for the weight of impact is yet to come. But I've definitely done a lot of thinking about it, and I've experienced what it's like when you don't have the sense of the weight of it. Does that make sense?
It kind of. I'm curious how you're going to measure it, because this is something which is a challenge that we have at Purpose Advisory as well.
Yeah.
It's we're not focused on just whether or not clients are going to make more money. Sure, we provide financial advice. Not
Mm,
just focused on whether or not clients are going to achieve their goals or their objectives, because sure,
yeah.
that's coaching. It's all there,
Yeah.
but there's something deeper. The closest we've gone to it so far is satisfaction, but
Yeah.
we're still not 100% sure exactly how to measure, I guess, fulfillment.
Yeah. I think fulfillment's something different. Like I know what fulfillment has meant for me to date. I think that kind of currency of impact will then have some kind of value with regard to fulfillment. I don't yet know. What I do know, the early signs I've had are when as I did on the weekend, I was at a wedding with an amazing, so my EA and her Samoan fiance. And I've spoken to a bunch of their friends many of them are exactly the kind of people that we're really wanting to really catalyze into the lives they deserve with Ria. And when I hear them tell their stories about all of the things that we've talked about, but they then put themselves on the spectrum, not in those words, but I get that they've lived the same kind of experience that I have, and how needed it is that we're doing what we're doing. And when they say things like, "This is the first time that anyone's ever sat down and talked about my future or given me an opportunity like this. I never thought that that would happen for me." That is my sense. That's the first signs that I've had of the currency of it, because we deliver on that. And the measurable to your question is, it's how many of those people got to the other side of it and found themselves with the skills and resources to choose a different life. We can measure that cohort by cohort. We can measure it longitudinally, and that's without the five plus multiplier impact of them and toward those people around them. So I think for us, we're probably lucky in that we'll be able to measure it quite easily. Median income is another. That's one kind of like a key driver for us is, median income for Maori and Pacifica communities in New Zealand is 20% below the national median. Every single person that emerges out of one of our programs who's from one of those communities, there's a 50% swing. They'll be 33% above the median income. You do that enough times, you see what I mean? You've got something very
Mm,
measurable.
you do.
Then there's the qualitative aspect. I mean, that's kind of quantitative. There's the qualitative aspect. Is how empowered are they? What sense of will they have on whether they are living a self-determined life now? Um, so we've got that stuff to look forward to. I think the bit I don't have an answer to is, but a bit of a sense is, will the currency of impact, the currency of change, and realizing that purpose, will it lead to greater fulfillment for me? I'm almost certain that it will. I've had a bit of a taste. Um, does it matter whether it does or not? Look, it kind of does. I don't know that this is an ego thing, but I had a bit of a moment at the back end of last year where I just felt like I was doing tasks. I was, purpose, impact startup, all of this stuff, but I still just felt like there were moments there where I was just cranking the handle with just another business. And I think that's just human, right? I mean, even though there's these ideas and this vision and this measurable purpose, work can still just feel like work. And I think, the part that makes it not feel like work so much is the fulfillment. And I think, for the fulfillment, you need the currency of impact in order to join all those dots up. So that's the kind of the way that I see that at the moment. But I'm also just kind of like, hey, it's cool being human when you're doing stuff and it's for all the right reasons, and it's great, but you just also feel weighed down by work. You feel tired. It's just human.
I mean, how do you manage that, right? Because you're on a lot of boards, you've got a lot of roles. You've even just as investor, you're engaged with a whole bunch of different businesses, and through Humi Group and then Rio as well.
Hmm.
How do you manage that as well as everything else that's really important to you, your wife and your kids and your friendships and your health and all of it?
So, about a year, so coming year, it was about this time last year. I had all of these options.
Mm.
I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't have a really super clear idea of what the commercial model for Rio was. We hadn't quite modeled that out. We were in the process. We also needed to land on a product, something that could be productized. We knew what the pain points were. We knew why we were doing it, but then landing it in something scalable and productizable took another few months. Took till about June. Um, and so I had these other things that in that, you know, the life, that persona, if you like, that you described early on, doing things I like that help people and grow businesses and create wealth for multiple people. That's kind of what I was doing. I also love governance, not governance in itself, because I do find a lot of governance is dry. I love the possibility of what it can be when it's done super well, where you've got a measurable impact on the success of the business, and it's in a really lean way. And we're doing stuff that really feels like it's moving the business forward. I love that stuff. I hate compliance activities, though they're essential. They just don't get me fired up. So when we had all these opportunities last year, I didn't know how much effort Rio was going to be. So I just signed up to lots of things. I said yes to everything, and even with the kind of the purpose filter or the purpose lens, I knew exactly why I was in each of the things I was in, and it was 100% purpose. And I guess I thought that there would be this kind of bottomless pit of energy when you're doing completely purposeful stuff, almost 100%. And at times it has been like that, and then at other times it's not like that at all. And it's just lots of stuff where you've got to fit it in. So it hasn't been the easiest to juggle those things. This is definitely a year where I need to focus. I mean, we talked a little bit about startup land earlier. Startup land is brutal, regardless of kind of I think what you're doing. Going from 0 to 1 is not easy. It's normally the only thing that people do. So I definitely had too many things on last year, and I felt it, particularly towards the back end. So learned, calibrated, and just rationalizing a bit of what I'm spending my time on this year. But it's not in me just to switch things off. So there'll still be a juggling act. But I think the framing, I've really learned a lot in the last few months, really since just before Christmas after some reflection, that conversation about the currency of impact. I'll put a lot of effort into that each day to figure that and be connected to it. I actually tend not to refer to Ria as work now. This is a choice. I could have made any other choice around what we did with our time. I say us because my wife and I have had this picture of traveling the world, and when you're liberated, what do? You do lots of that stuff with our kids. Pretty hard to do that while you're doing a startup. Probably not smart. So we still want to do those things, but this is a choice, and that I've found it's a powerful motivator for me to put it in perspective. So I don't refer to there often as work, because a lot of that kind of it's work. Just all of those kind of patterns of familiarity of kind of slaving to the grind, as we all have, they just kind of come up. So I don't say this to people because people look at you a bit funny when you say this, but what am I going upstairs to do? I'm going upstairs to create impact. I'm going upstairs into my office to generate momentum. I'm going up there to make a difference. That's how I've had to reframe things for myself, and it really works. As opposed to, I've got to work. Well, I can't do that. I've got to work. It's just, I don't think it's language that no one, anyone should use, but it's become particularly important for me to reframe in that way.
Yeah, so like that's awesome that you don't refer to it as work anymore, because I guess, do you feel that it's the change of language that's helped you not feel like it's work, or do you think that's the perspective of not viewing it like work that's just made the language shift so easy?
It's more that, and then the words are the kind of the other cues, aren't they? That's where we kind of get our behavioral cues, is from words. So it really is the intent. Connecting it with the intent is the major bit.
Okay. So then it's no longer kind of balancing work with family life and all that kind of stuff. I'll rephrase the initial question is, how do you balance all these choices? Choices to spend time with your wife, choice to spend time with your kids, choice to uh, to put your energy into Ria and all these other areas and all these other investments and everything.
My wife, this cracked her up. So in true kind of Nate style, I kind of put together a schedule, and she she saw me looking at it one day, and she saw herself in there for like this percentage of my time and like the activities that we're really doing, and my kids and like all of these other things. But you've got to have a plan, right? You can't just sign up to stuff and not have a plan. So you've got to know, is this even feasible? And so by developing this plan and estimating the activity and across a year, and then breaking it up into percentages like a pie graph, I was like, okay, this is feasible. I'm gonna have to be very disciplined, but it's feasible. So that's what I needed to do. And then over time, living into that kind of split has allowed me to calibrate as to how realistic it actually is. It's fine on paper. Do you have the mental energy, the capacity? How much time do you need to? Is that enough time to read? I love reading. I find reading such a inspiring activity, but also a great recovery activity. Have I got enough time to read? Have I actually been able to spend that much time with the kids? Do I have to blow up in front of the TV and watch Netflix? All of those types of things, right? I've got a year's worth of data, so it's been very helpful. That's kind of a long answer to your question, but you got to plan. You got to make sure it's feasible, and then you live into it, and then you calibrate. Like, did it work? If not, change something. So we're just in a changing something mode at the moment.
See, it's interesting because about, I guess, I don't know, half the people that I've interviewed so far have said something along those lines. Like, you got to have a plan, you got to make it work, and then just kind of stick to this plan, and otherwise nothing's going to work, and kind of keep making it work somehow and change what you need to. And others who go, and anytime I've ever made a plan, it's just failed. So I'm just going to set my intentions and just make it happen. And who cares about planning? If it's not working, then I'll see it's not working. I just got to keep reflecting on it and then making sure that it eventually works, whatever it is. But
Yeah.
what both you share and what they share have in common is the sense of agency. Ultimately, what you're saying is that the way for you to balance everything is not based on what other people do or how other people can help you do it. It's up to you as to what action you're going to take.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that?
It's so true. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I get it, iterating and just signing up for things and figuring it out. It makes sense. But, I do believe it has to be feasible. If it's not feasible, if you don't actually have enough time in the day, then that's just crazy. But I know some people who live like that. And there's one woman in particular, I won't name her, an incredible capacity for work. She told me the other day that she said no once in 4 years to something where someone said, will you mentor me? Will you invest in this? Well, not invest in this business. She does that for a living. Will you provide this kind of support? Will you do this due diligence on this deal? Once in like 4 years. And she knew what time it was. I'm like, whoa.
Wow.
But then I kind of just look at incredible capacity, but also just massive hours. Like, it's just wild, I'm not someone who believes in burning the candle. Not anymore. It's got to fit that definition before around, balancing all of that stuff, that balance point, because it's no longer the balance point of living in the zone of creating sufficient resources. I've done that, but now it's about the balance point between what it takes to generate impact with happiness, health, and purpose.
Okay,
I've kind of swapped those two things out.
You're no longer balancing the hours that you're spending towards things. You're not kind of balancing the tangible outcomes. You're balancing these kind of intangibles, right? These impact and happiness and sense of contribution and purpose.
I think the difference is it's still the same actually. I think the difference is that instead of it being a focus on, feeding the machine and developing resources, money, wealth, I've swapped that out now for purpose because that other piece isn't such a big deal now. But it still it's still got measures and it's still got inputs and outputs, and it still needs to be balanced with, well-being, happiness. The thing is you can strike. I think I said, it included purpose. It's almost like purpose is crossed into the main thing, and I've dropped it off the thing that the two entities of kind of, I think I said happiness, health, and purpose with like pursuing success in life. Drop the purpose. Happiness and health still super important. It's just that purpose is kind of like fulfilled that's the measurable thing. And I don't think I'm not the kind of person that would pursue purpose if it wasn't measurable. I am too wired for a particular way, measures and outcomes. It's served me super well. At this point in my life, purpose does need to be measurable. Impact needs to be measurable. Will that change over time? Maybe. I'm certainly open-minded to it. I mean, it would be nice to just, just invest some time and some energy, some intent, without having to have hard measures. But yeah, maybe that'll come. I don't know.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're now just primarily focused on impact, how are you defining your purpose? We're coming back to a question from 30 minutes ago now.
Well, it's a kind of a single statement. my purpose is to actually, it's funny about single statements. I'm decreasingly over time. I used to be really into, like most of the world is, you know, doing a lot of work, defining something, and then getting it down to as few words as possible. I've found over time you lose so much meaning when you do that.
Yes.
Why does it have to be short and pithy? Sounds good. Sounds great in a conversation. Might look good on your wall. I don't know if people even do that anymore. But if you lose meaning, you have to remind yourself of that meaning. So I tend to keep the words in there. Um, and so, for me, my purpose um, is to enable as many people as possible to realize the life outcome that they truly deserve. Um, yeah, and do it in a self-determined way. That's it.
But as you
If-
say, that's losing so much meaning in it, because with almost every word there, I'd want to dig in and understand
Yeah,
it more.
yeah, that's it. There's I've got like a handful of statements around, you know, what kind of, it's like a ball with layers. Like this, it's just this kind of mashup of ideas that if I can do that, I think I'm fulfilling my purpose. Um, and I think, look, the relationship between purpose and impact is funny, eh? And I don't know that I have a lot of wisdom yet on that. Um, you be doing what you do, maybe you've got some deeper insight, but I mean, I think, impact is measurable, should be ideally. Um, Purpose, I do feel like, is a pursuit. It's an orientation and an intent. Um, yeah. So that's as much as I know about the two of those things, and I don't personally feel like I need to split hairs around the two. And it'll probably change over time.
It kind of almost sounds like the the impact is the destination you're trying to get to, right? You can find
Yeah.
it on the map. You know what it looks like. You know where it
Mm,
is. You can check your GPS. You know that you've
mm,
gotten there. You know you've
yeah.
arrived.
Mm,
While it's almost as if in your mind the pursuit is like the vehicle which you're choosing,
yeah.
the fancy car you're driving.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty accurate.
Okay.
Mm.
So I've still got some questions on leadership
Yeah.
to,
Please.
to circle back.
Yeah.
So you're saying that your style of leadership has changed now. It's no longer just the one person who's making the key decisions. It's
Yeah.
a team of people making decisions together. Everyone's kind of a leader in their own right.
So I don't want to oversimplify my kind of previous definition of leadership. Um, but I think what I've seen work well is, having um, having a single person accountable for, you know, things that really that only they can be accountable for is good. That's still accurate. That still works. That's just a way to manage risk in a business. Also, it enables people to lean into their superpowers, which I think is fundamentally what we all need to do. We need to understand what they are, we need to develop those, and we need to embrace them, unleash them on the world. And that's certainly something we want to be doing at scale inside of the as well. Um, I think how it's changed, I think what we don't have much of is this. It's the sense of, what's the best way to describe it? There's just a deeper level of the nature of the people, the nature, my kind of major co-founder, the two people who work in the business every day, it's Tim Hefferly-Green and I. And it's partly the way he is. He's he's an incredible guy with a lot of different skills, a lot of superpowers, and he's a fantastic coach. So it's partly the construct and the type of people we're assembling, also the kind of work we're doing, but this sense of providing a point of stability. That being me, I've always been the stable person, regardless of no matter what's going right or wrong. I'm the rock. I've become accustomed to that for a long time. Inside my immediate family, inside my siblings, my mum, in my friend group, and in my businesses, I'm the rock. And yeah, I say that with no ego, by the way. This sounds like I'm the rock, but it's just I'm that person. I'm that person who's prepared to shoulder stuff. And
Especially if you've got a plan and you're the type of person that says, I'm going to stick to that plan.
yeah, and who can also not, even when there's a lot of difficult stuff going on, a lot of emotional content, who can be very consistent and stable throughout. So that's the role that I've played. And so what that can mean is that I'm always honest, transparent. It just doesn't need to be everything. And so perhaps in other businesses, I've filtered some stuff so that I can continue to provide that point of consistency and stability for others. Because as a leader, people take their cues from you. You know, I had to really get used to that about 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. Like they really do, whether you want them to or not, they just do. Whether those are good behaviors or whether those are behaviors you don't really want them to exhibit, but you know, they just do. And so being consistent and showing up in a certain way is a one way for people to adopt the what does it mean to be inside this business? And it gives them the stability so that they don't have to worry about me or anything else going on in here. You just worry about you. You know, you look after you. In there, this team would not let that happen. There's a level of transparency that is expected that is really empowering, but it's not what I'm accustomed to. I've told you what I'm accustomed to, and it's quite different to that. And so it's kind of I had to really check myself as to whether am I trying to apply some of that. Is that like corporate speak? Is it like corporate culture stuff? And I wouldn't call Potentia corporate culture, but no doubt it's borrowed from aspects of corporate cultures. Is that some kind of capitalist kind of behavior, capitalist leadership style? So I've asked all of these types of questions. And then with what we're looking at, the way we're looking at doing things in there, do I agree with that? Does it just, because it was kind of, the alarm bells were going off for me. I'm like, this is not how you run a company. This is not how we do it. Because my formula, those heuristics, those patterns have worked super well in the past. And so I really had to check myself. Is there a better way by being open-minded to being a different kind of leader? And after a bunch of discussion with people, I decided there was. And so the test for me was there was a call that we were all on, and I just shared with everyone where I was at, what was going on for me and what was going on in my head, and what that had manifested to in terms of behaviors or the way I was engaging or not engaging, as the case was at that time. And the uplift of energy and the outpouring of connection, if you like, that I witnessed as a consequence of choosing that style of leadership was the evidence, was the calibration I needed to go, this is the right way, this is a new way, and it's a very vulnerable style of leadership. But this is the right way for this group. This is who we are. But you know, all of those kind of those old patterns that have served me were like, nope, this is the wrong way, don't do it. This is not right. You've got to be the person that is the rock. You've got to be bulletproof, all of this crap. So I'm open-minded. I still know the things that have worked really well, and I want to continue to see those practiced well, but there can be other ways to do things. And I think fundamentally it means that the level of transparency and the style of communication and almost the benchmarks of how we show up are different in there to anything I've seen before.
Do you say that calibration came from one session where you decided to show up in a different way?
Yeah, one session as a group, and then a couple of conversations with some people. Tim, my dude, my co-founder. Was it just him? And actually, this is the other thing, and a couple of other conversations with some of the other people, and I just wouldn't normally share that stuff with people to get their opinion on how they think I should lead. But I did, and they gave me their feedback, and then Tim gave me his, and So that one session, that's what I practiced, and I got a very clear message. So
That's
yeah.
that's incredible. Because I mean, there'd be people who are listening to this who are thinking, I know that how I'm leading is not right at this moment, or I'm trying to get ready for leadership, and the way that I'm doing it, or the way that I've been practicing it, or the way I've been trying to implement it, just or hasn't been working just right yet. But I know this is something which I've got to work on. But I'm in corporate world, and I don't know if I should be vulnerable, and I don't know if I can be vulnerable because all these other people are incredible, and everyone's comparing me to other people, and they're going to have all of these limiting beliefs which are coming up, all of these thoughts, at least whether limiting or not, something else. What would you want to share with those people?
I'd ask them to think about who they're talking to. Who might they be managing, working with, supporting, talking to, speaking to? Because my bet is that those people are really no different in their own insecurities, their own, fear of being vulnerable, and also their own patterns of self-doubt and all that stuff, right? Um, we're all actually pretty similar. So what when I led in that way, it enabled everyone to connect with me as an equal and someone who's just as human as everybody else. So it made it okay for others to show up that way. And so they all, what happened was a string of each of them sharing their own version of what I just shared, which blew me away. They'd all experienced a similar thing in the previous couple of weeks. So we set a new standard. We collectively set a new benchmark of what it is we share with one another. And what we created was a truly safe place. It doesn't get much safer than I can show up and be vulnerable and feel safe. Surely that means that everyone can too. And not only that, but maybe that's the expectation. I think maybe there was enough, it was pivotal enough that people thought that that's their way. That's how we work together. Yeah.
Amazing. So you
It
started
was a cool
changing.
moment. It was a cool
Yeah.
moment. I got to say, I was pretty freaked out because I was like, man, this is not something I would ordinarily do. This could blow up, and I may not look like a great leader. And this is pretty early for people to believe that, and I don't believe that because I'm pretty sure I'm a good leader. And so it was a gamble, and I was freaked out, and I wasn't the most eloquent I've ever been. But that's all part of it. I think they loved the fact that I was just being me. Um, I do trust them all, and so I guess the question would be, God, human nature, right? Would those possible leaders that are out there listening to this that you've kind of like, alluded to, mentioned, do they trust the people that they'll be sharing with? Because I think that's a big part of it. Because I think you do need to create a safe environment. What does a safe requirement require? It really does involve a lot of trust and a genuine belief that all of the people have got the best intent for everyone there. Um, in Māori we call it, there's this, everything is a life force. I have a life force. I referred to it before. It's called my Māori. And as a team, as a group, as a company, we have an energy, which is the Māori of, so let's say the Māori over there. All of us have a role to play. This is tikanga Māori, so these are the practices of the ancient ways. All of us have a responsibility to ensure Māori order, the well-being of one another and of the collective. I know for a fact that everybody in there is there to ensure the well-being of the life force of our group. And I guess I would probably not have shared what I did if I didn't have that certainty. So I didn't really clock that or think about that at the time, but on reflection, that was true, and that's the kind of language we've used. And I know that's not a particularly common way to talk about workplaces, but why would we talk about a workplace any differently to the way we would talk about, any other kind of group of people who are sharing your energy and ideally, supporting one another and ensuring their well-being, because it's really the same. I think some of the labels and some of the preconceptions and stuff, I shared some of mine inside of like business context. I just don't know how much they serve us. But rather than just toss them away, you do need something better. And I think that, I'm blessed and everyone in this country is blessed because we can access this incredible like life and organizational development toolkit called Tikanga Māori, which has been there for over 1,000 years. It was equally relevant 1,000 years ago to what it is today and will be in 1,000 years' time. That's amazing. It's part of our program. We've built we've just kind of hitched our framework on top of that because it's so fit for purpose. And it's funny enough, whilst it's ancient, it's a lot of the often the case with the indigenous ways. It's ancient, but it's just as relevant. Why? Because fundamentally we're still people. So, if it worked then, why should it not work now? Because we're still people, with feelings and emotions and life force and all of those things, right? So yeah, I wouldn't have taken that gamble if I didn't have a sense that everybody had already bought into that framework. I guess what I was doing was adopting that framework wholeheartedly rather than the one that, I was most accustomed to and where I'd come from.
Yeah. Wow. Because I mean, like, there are a lot of people where I'm thinking of a few examples where of clients, but also friends and peers, where they got to a stage where they just figured, I cannot continue in this current place the way that things are.
Mm,
So therefore, I've just got to leave.
mm,
And a lot of them decided that instead of just leaving, just give it as a last ditch effort to just try and act the way they wanted the team to act. Just try and
mm,
act the way they wanted it to be. And worst case is they end up finding a new job, which is what they were going to do either way. So
sure.
worst case, it would get a little bit awkward.
Mm,
So is it worthwhile learning a whole lot as a result of that pain of awkwardness,
mm.
or would it be better to just kind of avoid the awkwardness and just hope that you're going to find somewhere else where everything's going to work out?
Well, you kind of know I'm pretty sure you know what my answer would be to that. Like, just experiment. Do it in a considered way, but put it out there. You'll get some information back. You can learn from that. You can calibrate from that. It'll be super powerful. And even if it doesn't land with everybody, it'll land with some people. Because if you are empathizing with others and that's where your leadership is coming from, it means a lot to most people that value those things. And so those people will give you insight on what it was that worked, and they may give you some insight on some of the aspects either of the delivery or the actual narrative itself, or the decision, or whatever the situation it is that could be tuned better. So, here we are as leaders. Who are we leading? We don't just lead ourselves. Leading self is the thing, but leading yourself, you've got a feedback loop on that. It's a pretty small circle.
You can feel pretty
Um,
good. You can feel pretty good about yourself
you
that way.
can. But leading others, they need to tell you, like that's the point. Like just getting something out of a toolkit that someone else has given you, like that's useful if it's been calibrated off their experience. But it's the group that you're leading, it's the group you're managing. Those are the people that matter most in that scenario. I mean, the way I've done it in the past, so when I've tried things in the past, I've tried things, and then I've had certain people who have been kind of giving me that feedback and that calibration. Not necessarily everybody. So that's probably something I wouldn't do. I wouldn't have experimented with that, with the example I gave, and then immediately gone afterwards. Did that work for everybody? Unless I knew that it did. If everyone's in like emotional and sharing, and I can get their sense of energy, and I'm like, this is awesome. It's quite nice to say, this is a way, to make it a public kind of almost a public debrief. Otherwise, I would just kind of read the room and then go to some of the key people and say, what did you think? What landed? What didn't land? And I'd do it across a few people, not just one. And then I've kind of got a few points of reference, and I would definitely tune how I delivered it or planned it or whatever it was, or made the decision, or how inclusive I was, or whatever the bit of feedback might be around. in the future. And I think that's a really powerful way. It's a experimental but a lower risk way to do it, but it also means you're just not doing it in a vacuum because, like we said, there's no leadership in a vacuum.
Mm.
It requires others.
See, this is awesome because a lot of people who are more risk adverse, like yourself, will tend to want to avoid everything which is uncertain and
Mm,
avoid all the unknowns, all the uncertainties. I've often found myself to be like that as well, and it can be limiting, right? It's like
mm,
but what it sounds like for you is that you've really embraced this notion of a growth mindset. Is that
yeah,
everything which happens, good or bad, is an opportunity to learn.
massively, massively. I still have to remind myself of that sometimes. I still seek the comfort zone,
Mm.
um, but I feel like I'm dying if I do that. Comfort equals dying. Sounds terrible. It's not that catchy a phrase, but it's true. I mean, you look at the scenarios in which you kind of apply that statement physically. Yeah, comfort. Your body's going to die. Your cells are going to die. Your brain will die if you don't challenge it. If you slide into the comfort zone. Same with relationships. So it's super important. And look, sometimes I have to give myself a stiff uppercut. Um, it's that a cold shower works. I'm always a cold shower every day person. That's a fantastic way to remind yourself that life isn't just about comfort. And that if you can do that in the morning, and you can be prepared for those other uncomfortable moments throughout the day, which selected well probably mean you're growing. You're becoming a better practitioner, better leader, whatever it is that you do.
Do you seek people? No, do you seek out people and relationships that are going to test you out of your comfort zone?
Yeah, I do. I do. And it's funny, in some phases more than others. And if I find myself, I wouldn't say, so I know some people that are very formulaic in how they construct that kind of, just call it that position of comfort. In other words, they don't allow themselves to be comfortable very often. And they will, add a certain number of new people to their lives. Like they're quite formulaic. There's one in particular who does that. And he does it very effectively. I tend to find myself in phases. I tend to read it. And when I've found myself in a phase where I'm seeking comfort more often than not, that's when I give myself a stiff uppercut. I'm like, right, this isn't where you want to be. And I'll do just it'd be some meditation. I'll reflect. I tend to capture and write down what I've reflected on. It's always got some structure. Sounds really dry, but I tend to capture stuff. I'm not much of a writer. I've got heaps of beautiful diaries, but my writing doesn't look the best. Can't always read my own writing, so I'm very digital. And so I've got like I've got asana projects that are just like my life, just like but like a Trello board, just these things, these reflections, um, and I kind of test how much I need to stretch myself in each of those areas that matter, and how comfortable I am in others. It works really well. Probably been doing that for about quite a long time, maybe I'd say about 15 years.
What's the trigger for you that says, Nathan, you're getting too comfortable? Snap out of it.
Um, when I haven't felt, this is sound funny, when I haven't felt that proud of myself that often. So
Okay.
my sense of achievement isn't maybe where it was meant to be. And what I'm sharing here is a crossover between the kind of the way I assess the world, as we've talked about, and the way I do now. But a lot of those patterns still persist, right? Because that's what you've known. Um, uh, so I see warning signs um, where I'm like, right, I'm just not at my best, or it's a bit easy. I guess I do look for it. My meditation every morning, 20 to 30 minutes every day, that certainly helps to identify those things. Not specifically, but afterwards it does. Um, the other is I do time-based ones. There's certain moments in the year where I get super reflective. So one of those moments for me was the back end of last year. From about mid-November up till Christmas, I tend to get really reflective. I have some structure in how I reflect. And then I have a picture of where I'm at, how I'm showing up at that point in time, and what kind of future I want to create over about a 5-year time frame. And I pick those files up or those boards back up, and I edit them, and I gain that. Or I find it a very energy giving exercise. And I just get really great clarity. And then I've kind of got myself sorted so I can relax over my break. And I've had enough time to plan for change. What I found in the past, so I didn't really have that time to do that last year. So I had to squeeze it in. I was desperate for it. I just wasn't myself. I was really desperate for it. I could just tell I hadn't had enough time to reflect, and it was kind of taking its toll. So I made some time. I put half a day aside. I went over to Waiheke. It's a nice kind of island here where it's got good energy and it's a beautiful spot. Did some reflection, captured this stuff, and I just had all these answers about things and some insights, and I was able to plan off those and kind of walk into. It was a little late, just prior to Christmas, not enough time. It's a busy time, but it did leave me just enough time to hit the new year with that clarity. I've always thought in calendar years. I just like that. I like the cycles. I don't like to think of it as one big continuous thing. Um, and then the other time is the middle of the year, and that's it's the opposite. It's because the middle of winter, right? You you know, having some real clarity and a strong orientation towards what the rest of the year looks like can be something that I think we all need when it's that kind of shortest day, coldest, darkest. You know, you want to feel fired up about what you're doing with your life. So middle of the year is often when I'll do that too.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, that's cool. You've got all of these. You've got this kind of sense of awareness, which is kind of how much achievement am I experiencing? Like what how high or low is my sense of achievement?
Yeah,
And somehow you've got a gauge of that. I'm guessing it's very intuitive. And then you feel, oh, I'm not achieving as much as I should. I've got to snap out of it. I've got to do something. I've got to
yeah.
change.
Yeah, or I'm not growing. That's the other one. So the sense of the
Mm.
achievement of growth, doing a new activity, having a new capability, a new skill. Yeah, those are. It can even be things like, how many books have I read? Because I do find I just get less hungry for life when I'm in my comfort zone. When I'm really hungry for life, my capacity to do stuff and get through stuff is immense. When I'm in that kind of comfort zone, it's like a quarter as much. So that's the other thing. If my productivity drops, it's time.
Yeah. Productivity
Yeah,
drops
yeah,
means, yeah, it doesn't mean you got to work harder. It means you got to change something, right?
yeah. Get inspired. Because the reason that I might be less productive is because I'm just not inspired. I'm not driven, motivated, fired up about something. And sometimes it's just framing. Sometimes it's not the actual stuff. It's just the perspective and the framing that needs a bit of an adjustment. Um, yes, I'm open-minded to what the fix might be, but if you look into those areas, then you can start to find the answers.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, let me as we begin to draw towards the end of this chat. You definitely are a big player in the tech space in New Zealand. You've been involved in a whole bunch of tech startups, and pretty much everything that you do focuses on efficiencies and helping others through tech. What are your thoughts about tech in general in the world, as where we stand and where the future lies and where we're headed?
I think not enough of us have got a sense of how powerful the exponential movement, largely through technology, that has been underway for a long time. And then because we don't think exponentially, we think linearly. And if you don't think exponentially, and if you don't plan exponentially, then stuff happens that can really surprise you. So I think, we all need to understand the divide that is growing exponentially between those that have and those that don't. And I would say that if you wanted to pick one domain to ensure you fall on the right side of that domain, it's develop a deeper understanding of tech. There's different types of tech. There's straight up technology. There's deep tech, which is applied sciences. But fundamentally, the greatest, competitive advantage in this world now and for the foreseeable future is your ability to harness tech. That's the game that's being played out at scale. What is our role in that? What does each of us, need to do to ensure that we can, jump on that wagon or make the most of it? Well, you want the cards, you want the chips in your stack that have got the highest value. The chips in the stack with the highest value are the ones that come out of tech. Those are like 10 to 100 times worth more than any other chip. So yeah, that's where I think it's going. There's a couple of amazing podcasts. I really like Tim Urban, Wait But Why, just to give people a sense of like where is this tech thing going? What is this AI? Like what's possible? What is the singularity? And the other is Singularity University and a lot of their very forward-gazing views on tech and what's possible. Well, not just tech, but specifically around exponential patterns and exponential technologies. That'd be my advice. Where is it going? I'm preparing myself for, serious adaptation. Yeah, serious adaptation as a consequence of what tech does to me, or I can do with tech. Yeah, whether
I'm not
that's,
sure what you
it's
mean by that.
possible I've got a business or more that just completely disappear. It's possible that some of the stuff that I'm involved in, as a result of some kind of technology or innovation, could be gone, could be decimated. The recruitment industry, the resourcing industry could be gone. We've been expecting something like that for about 10 years. It hasn't happened. Might it happen? That's the nature of exponential technology. There's this hockey stick moment. When it goes really steep, it still looks flat, and then it goes like that. When it goes like that, you're dead. You're over. So, I'm always prepared for completely losing everything as a result of, the most extreme situations happening. There's a good chance it'll happen with different types of tech. So that's one of the things that makes sure I go fairly diverse in terms of the things I'm involved with. Um, but yeah, I just expect the unexpected and it'll happen.
Okay, so you're expecting the unexpected. I mean, help me with understanding that mindset, or at least understanding some of that perspective. How are you preparing for things which are
Yeah.
completely unexpected?
One word. Yeah. One word, adaptation. If there was a quality or an attribute, apart from the kind of love, aroha, all of those things, respect, but in terms of the very, very functional attribute that I think I'm trying to instill in my kids and we're trying to instill in all of our learners that come through there, adaptation. I've probably used that word a lot in this podcast. Adaptation, being able to adapt, that is the greatest determinant of your future success. So, as long as I'm pretty good and getting better or staying current with my ability to adapt, I think I'll be fine. I think we'll be fine. If I ever fall into my comfort zone and I stop adapting, I don't have that confidence. We fall into the risk category. So I guess that would be my message. I think I kind of realized that maybe, yeah, 12, 15 years ago. It's stood the test of that much time. When I look at different things that have happened in the world over the last 500 years, that's the kind of the quality or the attribute that stands out most to me. So yeah, I guess that's a kind of a way that I would encourage or advocate that people think about life and what they're doing with their time.
So, is an example of that. I don't know, when a new piece of tech comes out, or a new platform, or a new engagement tool, or something new comes out, that you got to jump in,
Mm.
check it out, have a play, get involved with it. Is that what you're constantly doing?
Don't get left behind. Just don't get left behind. I think I see people very close to me, some people that live in this house, others really close to me, see tech stuff come up and they just put the blinkers on. And I'm like, no, that's the moment to step into, adapt, figure it out. You've got the capacity, you've got the time, you've got the faculties. Just figure it out because it's going to be very similar to something else with just a different interface, with a slightly different tilt. And once you can put something in a box and you can figure out how to kind of use it or understand it, you've adapted. So I think it's a great example that you've kind of brought up. That's what it looks like day to day. It doesn't have to be going always be learning, Udemy or Coursera courses or Rio courses. Not necessarily. It could be see something that scares you when it comes to tech and figure it out. Spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes, ask someone about it, borrow from the experience of others. Done. Move on. Next.
Right. So you don't have to keep jumping on to the next social media craze, and TikTok's come out, but I'm only used to Facebook and LinkedIn.
You see that? Yeah.
Because that's where it could lead people, right? They're like, okay, new piece of tech,
Yeah.
I better
No.
follow it. Or there's this new cryptocurrency that's come out
Yeah.
for this or this. And so, okay, I better jump into that. I can't be left behind.
Yeah. Look, I think social media, yeah, I'm with you. Social media, that's different. Understanding it and the dynamics of the community socially and from a tech perspective, useful. Do we need to completely participate? It depends. For me, it's what is the risk, what is the reward? I haven't seen enough of the reward for the risk with the such attention grabbing, always on platforms like social. I don't subscribe. That's not it's got its place, yes. Do you need to be across all of them? Do you need to be consuming your time? Because fundamentally they're the opposite of mindful experience. They're looking at the past or the future in a critical way. I just don't believe that that's how we should be spending our time. I just don't think that's healthy. But understanding how they work, what communities are they big in, what are the drivers, what's the commercial model, sure, that's worthwhile.
Yeah, okay. Cool. So what do you then think is the next 2 or 3 themes of tech that are coming up? That if someone's listening to this and they're saying and they're hearing you say, ah, man, Nathan's here telling me that I got to be adaptable, I got to be across new things, and I got to find technology that's going to scare me. But what's the technology that they should really be looking at?
Look, I reckon I'll just say one. I mean, there's two, but the second one, let's start with the first. Um, Automation. I think understanding, fundamentally understanding the role of productivity in the world, what that means for the individual, what it means for teams, what it means for businesses, what it means for countries. Productivity is super important. You need to understand productivity before you think about automation. So I would say that, automation is a way to drive exponentially greater productivity. And when you can shift such a powerful dynamic like that so profoundly, things change, the game changes. There's been the promise of so many different types of automation, which are typically, they're based in the tech industry for quite some time. We're definitely in this hockey stick moment where we're seeing aspects of automation hit their vertical kind of, part of the scale. And then others, generally speaking, we're not quite there yet. So I think understanding that and what does that mean for me? What might automation mean for me and whatever it is that I choose to do with my time, particularly if it's about monetizing my time, working for money, or building a business? What is the role? What are some of the kind of scenarios where automation is going to be a big deal? And, how can I ensure that I understand it? How can I ensure that I understand what that might mean in the business that I own or run or whatever? But also, well, what does that mean for the role that I hold, the job I have? There's been a lot of speculation about that, but not over a super long period of time. Only like 5 to 7 or 8 years in a cycle. That's not a lot of time. When we're talking like massive thematic changes, 5 to 7 years is not long. So we're still in that phase, and we still haven't seen the degree to which automation will profoundly change the world. So understand it. Like just figure it out. What is some of the stuff that's happening with automation now? Some of these technologies, like, don't have to go deep into AI, artificial intelligence or machine learning, but understanding a little bit of that is important. What other types of things can be automated, and what does that mean for people? Because I think we all need to take a position on, the role we play in the world, and the things that are uniquely human. I've been looking at that for probably about 7 or 8 years. What does it mean to be uniquely human inside the tech industry? And how long have we got before that will then change again? And the number of things in the pyramid of uniquely human things starts to get smaller and higher, right? So that the things that only humans can do is the little bit at the top. That's, I think, a frame of reference that's really important. It's a context that we need to understand.
Yeah. Okay. So try and identify what what you can possibly do that machines will take the longest to replace you with. Is that your approach?
Yeah. There's lots of stuff out there that give you scales. There's research, there's free research done by a lot of the big consulting companies, done by the likes of the Productivity Commission, done some great stuff, freely downloadable reports. Just get your head around it. Where are we at? Where are we at with our labor productivity in this country? This is New Zealand. We're talking about Australia as well. What are the things that determine the labor productivity? What does that mean over a period of decades? It's important stuff. Probably started to delve into macroeconomics there. It's something I love. But yeah, I mean, it's the impact of technology on macroeconomics. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something which is also a common theme across everyone who I've been talking to, is they're trying to take themselves out of the process and out of the delivery as much as possible. They're just trying to keep themselves in the relationships
Mm,
because they know that's something that they can do better than anyone else. They'll keep doing that. It sounds like you're
yeah.
saying the same thing.
That's it. That is definitely it. Absolutely. At the top of that stack is probably that. Most other things, but developing trust, and then the non-verbal cues that enable trust to be created. Because it's going to be a long time before machines can communicate non-verbally in ways that give us comfort or accelerate trust building. But it's probably not that long before machines can build trust in the written word or what you hear, what you say, how that's perceived. So yeah, I'm with you. And then once where there's nothing left at the top, it's a different world. When machines can do everything better than us, it's a different world.
Well,
The other theme that I kind of alluded to, just to touch on it briefly, is the nature of crypto, non-fungible tokens, that kind of stuff. It's important to know that stuff. DeFi, like decentralized finance, like it's all quite on the edge. It's certainly not at all mainstream, but these are concepts that are really worth understanding. Are they critical right now? No, but at some point they perhaps will be. Is there opportunity for people that kind of want to take some risk to make some money? Yeah. So yeah, that's another that I think is because it takes a technology domain and it slaps it right on top of something so fundamental to all of our well-being, which is, the nature of the financial system. So it's important to at least, depending on whether you want it to be in story form or whether you want it to be deeply based in research and evidence and like the actual kind of methods and stuff, everything's available to consume out there, and it's generally for free just after a bit of Googling. So I'd really encourage people to do that around cryptocurrency and NFTs.
yeah, okay. I mean, I was amazed for myself personally. For example, I've been listening to crypto for a while, but it was only a couple months ago that I even knew what Web 3.0 was, or even knew that Web 3.0 was a thing. And to think that I've been investing in crypto without knowing that Web 3.0 is actually a transition that the world's going to eventually make was astounding to me. I was clearly missing something massive. And so I guess
Yeah,
there's what you're alluding to
yeah,
is this ability to identify, kind of identify the things which you don't know. And so to try and identify those unknowables. And I guess you just got to be able to bounce off with other people and continue to do your research and find out what others say rather than
yeah.
just doing things yourself and just hoping you come across it, right?
Agree. Yeah, make it the conversation. Yeah,
Cool. Well,
yeah, and encourage your friends to do the same. It's look, they're good cerebrally, they're good challenging activities. So yeah, I totally agree that approach.
cool. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. And maybe I'll just give a bit of a summary of some of the things which I've heard you share, and then you'll have the opportunity to add something else to it or refine it. But it kind of sounds like your definition of purpose originally, or your
Mm,
definition of success, was to prove that you're worth something in the system, right? In the system, you're trying to feed it, and you figure that the more you feed it, the more successful you are. And you were trying to do that for what, over 20 years or 15, 20 years? And you started to realize that you needed to balance out getting your needs from the system, utilizing the resources in the system versus your own happiness and your potential as well. And so we spoke quite a bit about how this idea that I think you said growth is on the other side of pain, and you needed to constantly calibrate. I guess it's that calibration is the painful part, right?
mm,
Realizing that your perception isn't always aligned with reality is where the pain comes through. And then,
mm,
or maybe the deciding to actually take action on it and then to go through with what you're saying you're going to do is where the pain really comes through. But if you have enough faith in what your purpose is and what you're driven
mm,
towards, then it's not going to feel like it's not going to feel like it's meaningless pain as so many people constantly feel. And so you get so the way that you
mm,
calibrate, you said that you get really good information, you speak to people who know a lot and are balanced. You mentioned someone who you know who has really high EQ, and other people who have a whole lot of knowledge um, and a lot of experience in the particular area that you're trying to get support with. And then you start to look at how you can trust your instincts. And you actually saw that your instincts was kind of like the best. It's like your version of fact, your version of reality is if you're able to trust your instincts
mm,
and then apply those patterns, then you can shortcut. You can shortcut risks and pain and you filter out what you don't need. And you just got to make sure that your version of the facts are most aligned with reality. And you started then talking, I think you used the word
mm,
liberation and how it's not just about me, but other
mm,
people can also experience this liberation. And so the way that we can have it is by ditching the labels. And so that's a lot of what you're doing at RIA as well.
mm,
And when you started really talking about leadership, you started talking about how you understand the currency of money and relationships. And you've understood that for quite a while now. But what you've been learning is this currency of purpose, which doesn't make as much sense. And so, sure, within leadership, you still got to have one person who's accountable to the certain things which they're responsible for, and then lean into those superpowers and unleash them on the world. And everyone has their strengths and their weaknesses, and you got to understand that. But it's no longer just about representing stability and consistency. It's about transparency, so that everyone can treat you as an equal,
mm,
just as a human, like everyone else. And so you started saying that to
mm,
know when you've got to improve, it's firstly, you've built this safe space, which is your work, and you've also got it at home. And you don't even define work as work, it's a choice to be there. But as soon as you have this low sense of achievement, because you're being vulnerable in the safe spaces, you can very quickly identify whether or not your sense of achievement and your sense of impact is high or low. And then that's just the warning sign. It's like, you're too comfortable, Nathan. Snap out of
mm,
it. Use some meditation, some
mm.
journaling, reflect at the end of the year, the middle of the year, on that shortest day, dark, deep time you got to get fired up, right? Work on a new project, do something. And you started saying something really interesting about the tech space, which it kind of sounds like you're applying this in all areas of your life as well, is that you've got to continue learning. You've got to find new things which are on the edge, on the forefront of what's next. And it's through continuing to learn and continuing to grow
Mm,
allows us to step out of those comfort zones and continue to grow. And that kind of sounds like everything which you've shared in a nutshell
mm.
can kind of be like, address your shadow, right? Identify where your ego is trying to drive everything, and
Yes.
then really guide yourself towards what's most frustrating and what seems most challenging. And the more resistance you have to it, just the more you've got to go towards it, because otherwise you're going to get stuck. And I think you said it. I think you used the words, your brain's going to die, your body's going to die, and if you're not growing, then you're just getting closer
You
and
will
closer
die.
to death, right? You will die.
You're dying.
Do you have anything to add to that or clarify or emphasize?
Definitely that's a pretty good summary, Harry. So yes, find your shadow, lean into it. From that, master the voice. We all know what that inner voice says. Make sure it's giving you the narrative that you want it to, not the one that your shadow would have it talk to you about. Two, adapt, adapt or die massively. Um, and three, liberate yourself from the machine as soon as you can, and maybe it's sooner than you think. maybe that point at which you can choose to do the things you really want is worth sacrificing some of that notional wealth that you want to create before you go ahead and do those things. That would be the other, like, really kind of super amplified message from me.
Yeah, okay. That's amazing. I've got one final question for you. If you get to, let's just say that you're, I don't know, let's fast forward 40, 50 years, you're in your 90s, and you're looking back on your life and what you've done with it. What have you done to know, or what needs to have happened to have known that it's been a really successful, purposefully successful life, an experience of life?
So many things. I think my number one measure would be love and happiness. Those would be the things I look to first. Do they feel like they were there? Do I know that they were present to the people important to me every day? And that the things that I thought were important in terms of what my role in the world, why I'm on this earth, why I'm here, that I've started them in a way that don't need me anymore, so that there's perpetual intergenerational impact from those ideas, the movement of change. So yeah, I know that one, the second one sounds audacious, but why not? That's what we're setting up with Ria and probably other things that we'll do in the future. Setting a perpetual motion of positive change in place. It doesn't need you anymore. And that all you simply did was play your role while you were here. That's what success will look like for me.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing. And thanks for coming on and having this 2-hour-long chat. It's been amazing.
Awesome.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Success with Purpose, and I also hope that you feel capable to apply some of the perspectives and learnings from this episode in your own life. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to like and subscribe below. And until next time, live with purpose.